The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. This is Laurie Carter. I'm the social work coordinator for the Open Doors program, and I just want to welcome everybody to today's webinar. Today we'll be having a webinar on writing notes, tips for the transition specialist. For some of you, this will be a review. And for others who are newer, this will be hopefully a good resource for writing notes as a transition specialist. Because writing notes are such an important part of your job, we really wanted to give you some guidance on how to write an accurate, thorough, and yet concise notes. On today's webinar, we'll review when notes are needed, tips on writing accurate notes. We'll review the contact note tab in the database and how to complete that, as well as answer any questions that you may have. Feel free to either raise your hand if you have a question, or to type your question in the question box. Don't feel that you have to wait till the end of the webinar. Just ask the question as soon as you have the question as we go along. So to start with, when are notes needed? As a transition specialist, you're required to keep running contact notes on all your participants. You must document all contacts and all attempted contacts with and about the participants you're working with. This includes basically everything that you do. Every call you make, every meeting you attend, every time you receive a call, every time you have a discussion with someone. It includes all contacts with participants, with family members, advocates, facilities, staff, and agencies, all face-to-face calls. Anytime you do a referral, a QOL, anytime you do something for, with, or pertaining to the participant, you really need to write a contact note. It's also important to remember that anyone involved with the participant can write a contact note. There could be notes from transition specialists, peers, from the NYAIL administration, our nurse, Laura, housing specialists. So as you review your notes, you'll see notes from many different people in many circumstances. Now, some examples of when you need to write a note. I included this because it really is one thing to say you need to write a note pretty much for everything that you're doing for the individual. But these are some examples of when you need to write a note. Whenever you contact the participant or the family member, when you call the nursing home discharge planner, when you talk to the nursing home discharge planner, when you talk to the waiver staff, when you set up meetings, when you go to the meetings and have the meetings, there should be another note. When you talk, when you make a referral of any kind, when you talk to a family member, when you complete forms for participants, and again, when you set up a QOL and when you actually do the QOL, there should be notes on all of these, in all of these instances. I also wanted to point out when you close a case, you really need to write a corresponding note as well. So pretty much you need to be writing notes anytime you do something for, with, or pertaining to the participant. Types of notes. This is easy. There are only two types of notes. Transition notes are all notes completed prior to the individual transitioning to community living. And transition discharge follow-up notes are any note that you're completing after the individual transitions to the community. Next slide.
Okay. And just to add a small clarification, the transition discharge follow-up notes include if someone transitioned out of the nursing home and then it was a qualified transition, so you'll notice they have a transition date, and then they return to the nursing home. They have some other event that returns them to the nursing home. Those would still be transition discharge follow-up notes because they have that transition date in there, even though you're really working on transitioning them out again.
That's a good point. Note date. The date of the note is always the date of the actual contact. You have 5 days to put the note into the database. We realize that you are often on the road, that you can't necessarily write your notes immediately. So you do have 5 days to put your notes into the database. However, the date on the note is always the date of the actual contact. And that's something to pay attention to. In our program, the note date needs to be the date of the actual contact. Okay, tips on writing notes. When you're actually writing your notes, remember that your notes should really be a listing of everything that's occurred regarding the participant. By reviewing the notes, anyone reading the notes, whether they know your participant or they have no clue, should be able to have a clear understanding of everything that you've done for the participant and exactly where the participant is in the transition or the post-transition process. Your notes need to be specific. When you document, you need to document specific facts. You need to document who was involved in the contact or the attempted contact. You need to include their name and the title of the person. You might know who this individual is, but if I'm reading your notes, I may have no idea who Sylvia Smith is. So you need to document who the contact is with and their title. You need to contact what the purpose of your, you need to document what the purpose of your contact is. What did you do? What did you discuss or arrange or email or send? And what was the outcome? And if at all possible, you also need to include what the next step in the process is. By doing this, it makes your note very clear. You're able to anyone reading your note is able to clearly identify who you talked with, what you talked about, what was the outcome of what you talked about. If you're reviewing a person's options for discharge, your note should also include what the outcome for that conversation is. Is the participant thinking about whether she wants to use the waiver? Is she going to definitely use MLTC? Whatever the outcome is, you should definitely document that as well. And by documenting what's next, it kind of gives you an overview of who needs to do what. Sometimes I find that's frequently an issue. I thought the social worker was going to do that. I thought, the service coordinator was going to do it. It clearly documents who should be doing it. For example, reached out to Susan Taylor. This note is too vague. It is not specific enough. Reached out is currently a very common term that I see used very frequently. And when you're documenting, we really have to be careful in using the term reached out. What reached out means to me may be completely different than what reached out means to Tammy. So you really need to be specific. And furthermore, who is Susan Taylor? Is she a daughter? Is she an ombudsman? Is she a neighbor? Is she, a nurse at the nursing home? It needs to be more specific. In the specific version, spoke with Susan Taylor, Medicaid worker at DSS, regarding Jane Smith's Medicaid status. Susan reports that Jane's Medicaid is still pending, but should be approved by the end of the month. This note tells you who you contacted, her title. I wouldn't know otherwise that she was from DSS, and what you talked about, and what's the next step. There's no question when you read this note who you spoke to and what it is that you did. Another example, spoke to Tara and discussed options. Again, who's Tara and what options did you discuss? By reading this note, you have no idea what you really did. Did you discuss options for activities? Did you discuss options for, takeout? Or did you discuss options for services in the community? You may think, well, of course this is what I discussed, but we don't know that, so you have to be specific. The more specific version spoke with Mary's daughter, Tara. We discussed NHTD, MLTC, consumer direct services, and housing options. Tara feels the NHTD waiver would be best for her mother's needs. I will meet with Mary next week to discuss this and the process of moving forward with the waiver referral. You can see how the second note clearly documents all the work that you did, all of the things that you reviewed, and it also documents the results of your conversation and what's next. When you're writing notes, you also need to stick to the facts. When you write notes, you want to document the facts of the situation. You really want to avoid opinions. You definitely need to think about sticking to the facts. If you're documenting, if you feel for some reason you have to document your opinion, make sure to always back it up with the facts of the situation. As a transition specialist, you really are looking at facts, not opinions. For example, I think Mr. Jones should stay in the nursing home due to safety issues. Again, as a transition specialist, we generally should not be documenting our opinions. We really need to stick to the facts. And what are safety issues? In this opinion, in this first example, it's much too vague. It's just basically stating your opinion. What are safety issues? Does that mean that he's confused and disoriented with no family or no community support? Or are you personally simply afraid he might trip or fall at some point in the future? It really doesn't tell you what's going on in the situation. If you catch yourself writing an opinion, I found that one way to kind of document more clearly is to just ask yourself what the facts are that led to your opinion, and then just document those facts, because that's really what you're looking at, are the facts. Why is someone unsafe in this particular circumstance? In the fact-based note, at this time, Mr. Jones's needs cannot be met in the community. Due to his very high medical needs, including daily insulin injections and wound care, the denial of service from the NHTD waiver, the current lack of other community-based services, and his lack of community support and family support, a transition back to the community is not possible at this time. You can see from the second note, it's clearly based on facts. Instead of saying what you think, it tells exactly what the safety issues are and why his needs can't be met in the community. Notes should be non-judgmental. Contact notes should always be constructed in a professional, factual manner. They should never contain judgments or derogatory language, and they also should never contain sarcasm. A good way to ensure that your case note isn't judgmental or derogatory is to ask yourself, would the individual or any individual I've mentioned in this case note be offended by what I wrote? Now, an example of a judgmental case note. Met with Mary for a post-discharge follow-up meeting. She had a disgusting odor, was filthy, and her house was a disaster. Everyone can see that this version of a note is definitely judgmental and derogatory. I don't know about you, but if this note was written about me, I would feel horrible that this was documented in a medical record or in a record of any kind about myself. The second version met with Mary at her home for a post-discharge follow-up meeting. Upon arrival, TS noticed that Mary seemed to be having difficulty with her personal hygiene, as well as maintaining her home. We discussed this, and Mary reports that her aid service has not been showing up. We called the service coordinator, who will look into this immediately. You can see the second version is much more respectful and not judgmental. It still says that she's having problems, you know, and she needs assistance, but it's much more respectful and non-judgmental. Our second example. Mary has been stuck in this place for 10 years, which is not right. She has complained to everyone, but no one will listen. She is just being ignored. You can see that this first version is clearly an opinion. In the non-judgmental version, Mary has been a resident of Oak Tree Nursing Home for 10 years. She reports that she has complained to everyone, but feels that no one has been responsive. We discussed having a team meeting and discussed Mary's desire to transition to the community. TS will contact the nursing home discharge planner and Mary's family to make arrangements for a team meeting. You can see that the second version is based on facts. It's non-judgmental, yet it still states what her feelings are as well as the facts. She's been in the nursing home 10 years. She feels that no one has been responsive. And it also documents what you're doing about this, that you're going to arrange a team meeting or try to arrange a team meeting to discuss this. So keep in mind, definitely notes need to be non-judgmental. I wanted to include a slide on initial meeting notes because the initial meeting is so important. You're gathering and providing so much information on that initial meeting. During that initial meeting, you really need to document all that you've done. Initial meeting notes should really include everything that you've gone over and talked about. They should include who you met with, that you reviewed the Open Doors program. That's sort of the purpose of the initial meeting, is to explain what our program is and see if the person is interested in having us assist them. Whether they accepted or declined offers to be a part of our program. If you had the informed consent signed or not, that needs to be documented. Where the participant would like to live, that really needs to be asked during that first meeting. Where do you want to live? If you reviewed any information with them, if you reviewed their options, the TBI waiver, the NHTD waivers, MLTC, Consumer Direct, if you reviewed any community resources they'll need, you need to document and say that you've done that. Any information about the person's needs also needs to be documented. If they know right off the bat that they're going to need an EMOD, a house modification, that they're going to need Meals on Wheels, or they're going to need an aid service 3 times a week, document that. If they need housing, of course you want to document that. That's very important. And any medical or physical issues that you talk about. If you can see, you know, various needs, document it. If they share that they're diabetic or you can see they're a wheelchair user, document that. You have a lot of people on your caseload, and it's important to document all of this. And again, if someone else is reading your note, we're not going to remember these, you know, who the person is. We've never had the opportunity to meet them. So make sure to document as much as you possibly can during the initial meeting. Now, an example. Met with Eve Black, her daughter Marge Wilson, and the nursing home discharge planner Sam Smith for the initial meeting. We reviewed the Open Doors program. Eve signed the informed consent. Eve was admitted to the nursing home after having had a stroke approximately 1 year ago. Eve uses a wheelchair but can transfer independently. She and the nursing home discharge planner report that Eve is fairly independent with her ADLs, but does need minimal assistance. She's interested in aid service several times a week and will need housing. We reviewed the NHTD waiver, MLTC, and CD Pass for possible service options. Eve and her daughter will discuss her options and contact this transition specialist regarding her decision. This TS will also follow up within the next 2 weeks. You can see that this note covers so many aspects of what took place in the initial meeting. Everything you need to start the transition process is right here in this note. So your initial meeting notes really need to be as thorough as they possibly can. Now, you don't want to forget attempted contact notes either. You spend so much time making plans, trying to reach people, calling people, emailing, tracking people down. Make sure to document your efforts. You really have to document attempted contacts. When you try to call someone, when you stop by the nursing home social worker office, when you text or email, make sure to document this. Also make sure to document, especially with attempted contacts. If you're leaving a message, make sure to document that you've left a message. If you requested that they give you a call back, make sure you document this. Many people assume that we know that that was done, but that's not the case. Sometimes there's no voicemail to leave a message. Document that. It shows that you've been trying. Attempting to do what you need to do, and for whatever reason, you're running into roadblocks. For example, called Sam again, reached out to Sam Smith. Again, the first version is much too vague. The more specific version for attempted contacts: called Sam Smith, son, left a message requesting a callback. Stopped by Kelly Borden's, the nursing home discharge planner's office while at the nursing home. Left a message with another social worker in the office requesting that she contact me. By writing a little more of a thorough note, it tells you not only called the person, but you asked them to leave. You left a message asking them to call you back, and they, may or may not call you back. But as time goes on, you can see all of the attempts that you make, and the results of those attempts, and that's very important. So don't forget attempted contacts. Putting notes into the database. It's really important to remember that all notes must be kept in the contact note section of our Open Doors database. You can keep a paper file, or you can keep notes in your ILC database as required by your agency in addition to the Open Doors database, but never instead of. All of your notes need to be in the Open Doors database. I wanted to just review quickly the Open Doors database contact note tab. You can see the note type is either active or post-transition. The note date, remember, is always the actual date of the contact. Multiple person meeting, yes or no. The note details, who did you talk to? Who did you meet with, or who did you attempt to contact? Their name and title. What was discussed, done, or planned? What's the next step, and who's going to do it? Person contacted, make sure to include everyone that was involved in this particular contact. If there's 5 people at the meeting, there should be 5 names. Relationship to the participant. Make sure to put in the relationships to all the participants. One of the reasons why I ask that you put that in the details of the note is because unless it's one of the people on that list, we aren't going to know who they are. Many people that we contact fall under community service provider or other, and that doesn't tell me who they are. So it's very important up in note details to write that they're Jane Smith from social services. Otherwise, I'm not going to know who that person is. The form of contact, was it a phone call, a fax, an email, an attempted contact? That is on the form of contact. So make sure to fill that in, and was it a CPE? The next section is for peers. You'll notice the big red mark across the page. This is for peers. Transition specialists do not fill this section out. So that's one section you do not have to complete or worry about. This next section, the follow-up section, in my opinion, this section is greatly underused. By filling in this section, the database can actually help you keep track of when you need to follow up on something. By doing this part of the note, you can run a report that tells you any follow-up that's needed on your caseload. In a minute, I'm going to go over how to run this report, but right now, I just want to go through follow-up and then the barrier section. So we'll come back to that in a moment. For follow-up, all you need to do is put yes, and then write what your follow-up is. Who the follow-up is to be completed by, and when the follow-up needs to be completed by. That's all you need to fill out. And by doing that, you can run a report that will allow you to track all the follow-up that you need. I'm a list maker, and I would find this very helpful to have a list already made for me of what I need to follow up on. And we're going to come back to the report in a moment, but first we're going to talk about the barriers section. Now, the barriers section of this note is also a very important section. It's used to document the barriers to the transition process. As you all know, there are many times, often many barriers that are, get in the way of the individual actually transitioning back to the community. This is our section to document what these barriers are. Both the Department of Health and OPW look at this section to determine what the issues are in getting, what the issues are that are getting in the way of transitions. They want to know what these issues are, what the barriers are, what you're facing, what the individual is facing. And this is our section to report that. It's very important to fill this section out, and again, by using this barrier section, you're letting OPW and DOH know what your barriers are, what you're experiencing, what you're going through, what the individual is going through. So please complete this. Okay, the follow-up report. The follow-up report, you can get a follow-up report to look at all of the issues that you need to follow up on. You can also get a barriers report and look at what your barriers are that you've had to deal with. You do that by going to the Reports tab on the database, then going to the Regional Lead and Transition Specialist reports, and then going to report number 12. There'll be a listing on the top of that report page, and you can just go to report number 12, and the report that's at the top of your page will pop up, and you can see that this was done. I've blackened out the names due to confidentiality, but you can see it lists all of the different tasks that need to be followed up on and when they need to be followed up. So this can be a very important tool. You can use this to help yourself, help organize yourself, and to make sure you're following up as needed. So I encourage people to try this out. I think you'll find it really helpful. So in summary, everything you do or try to do for, with, or pertaining to the participants on your caseload must be documented. Notes need to be kept in the database. They need to be in the database within 5 days. They need to list everyone involved in the contact and their role. They need to include what happened during the contact, what was discussed, what was decided upon, what was explained. Notes should be factual, specific, detailed, and non-judgmental. Remember that your notes are a clear record of everything that's been done for or with the individual. Everyone who is involved and they should indicate exactly where the individual is in the transition process. You do a great deal of work, and all of it needs to be documented. If you have any questions at all, if you're wondering how to put something, how to write something, how to document something, whether it needs to be documented, call any of us here at NYAIL. We're more than happy to help.
So, Laura, we have a question for you.
Okay.
The question is, if you make multiple contacts and want to include it in one note, how would you classify the form of contact if you did both in phone and email, or would you recommend doing two separate notes, one for the phone contact and one for the email, given that it is two different people?
Technically, you should be doing a separate note for each of the contacts, so I would do two different notes.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It's really supposed to be two different notes. I mean, sometimes, you know, I've seen people write in there, you know, that they've emailed someone afterwards to let them know. You know, it does happen. It's not the worst offense, but really, technically, Laurie did exactly right. You're supposed to have the two different contact notes.
What I see sometimes that people have done is to kind of write a little summary note, you know, that you called the social worker 4 times and she hasn't gotten back to you. Again, it's good that you're writing that. Technically, you should write a note each time you do try. But it is, you know, at least you're documenting what you've done.
Right. And the other helpful hint, especially for emails, I see a lot of people do this, and it's absolutely fine, is they'll copy and paste the email right into the note. That makes life quite easy. It's very clear then what the email was. You know, you can put that right in there, and then there's no question as to what was said or anything like that.
And I know it sounds like a lot, all documenting on pretty much everything that you're doing, but the thing is really anyone should be able to pick up and follow what you've done and know what needs to be done just by reading your notes. We've recently had in an area 2 transition specialists that are out at the same time, and people have had to go in and fill in for these individuals. And it's important to have good notes, because at any point in time we may need to look at those notes and find out exactly what's been done, and we need to document that. It needs to be you know, clear. Someone should be able to pick up your caseload and know what needs to be done and what you have done.
I think, Laurie, I think that's a really good way to sort of look at your own notes and measure, am I putting what notes didn't need to be in there? Could someone else who doesn't know this person walk in and pick up and make things move forward?
Sometimes it's good to just read over your notes from start to finish on occasion, and just to kind of, with fresh eyes, you know, see if you can clearly tell where the person is. Sometimes when I'm reading notes, you know, sometimes it's very clear that you've met with the person, you talked about options, you've decided on an option, this is your obstacle, this is what you did, this is where the person is now. But other times it's really jumping all over. I don't know if a referral's been made, I don't know who made it, I don't know, you know, if you forgot about the person. Or what's going on. So it's very important to write all of that down. It's also important because you're doing a ton of work, and you really need, you know, to write all that you've done down. You know, you need to document all the hard work that you're doing. Any other questions? Well, if there are no other questions, I'll end the webinar by just saying, you know, remember that if, as far as notes go, if an auditor ever came, you know, to review our notes, which can happen at any time, if you didn't document it, it wasn't done. So make sure to document all your hard work, because you did it. You need to document it, and feel free to call us anytime for any assistance that we can provide. And thank you for attending.